What if the one thing you swore would never come out was finally laid bare? Not by a scandalous tabloid, not by an ex-friend seeking revenge, but by a composed aristocrat sliding a file across a polished oak table. What if everything you had built, your image, your identity, your marriage, your motherhood, was suddenly reduced to a stack of official papers stamped with unfeeling bureaucratic ink? The answer to that question may have played out behind locked doors at a discreet private estate just outside London, and it left Meghan Markle unconscious on the floor, her breathing shallow, and a personal assistant scrambling for help. No reporters were present, no cameras rolled, but the fallout from that quiet confrontation would ripple out across 2 continents and shake the foundations of the House of Windsor. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all began with a name many had not heard in years. Lady Colin Campbell. Elegant, enigmatic, and a figure both revered and reviled within British society, Lady C had largely remained on the sidelines in recent years, publishing the occasional royal book or granting the odd interview. But beneath the surface, she had been watching, listening, and, most damning of all, gathering. What she delivered that day was not a rumor, not a tweet, not hearsay or internet sleuthing. It was paperwork. Cold, hard records that, if legitimate, could obliterate the story Harry and Meghan had woven since the day they introduced their son to the world on the steps of Frogmore Cottage. These were alleged adoption documents bearing names, dates, signatures, and they suggested something staggering, that Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was not Meghan Markle's biological child, and may have been acquired through a private, confidential surrogacy arrangement shrouded in secrecy. For years, whispers of a hidden pregnancy, a pillow bump, or secret surrogacy had been dismissed as the ramblings of conspiracy theorists or vindictive royal watchers. Meghan's team always responded with confident smiles and ironclad statements about privacy. The Sussexes posed for glossy magazine covers, spoke of miscarriage and pregnancy struggles with Oprah, and even launched children's books inspired by their little ones. But now, those foundations were crumbling. This story is not just about whether a child was carried by one woman or another. It's about the destruction of trust. It's about identity, lineage, and the cruel ways power can rewrite narratives. It's about a woman who went from Hollywood to Kensington and chose to craft her own version of the truth, and what happens when reality catches up. But make no mistake, this is not a tabloid fantasy. This story is bigger than one family, one child, or even one marriage. It's about the public's right to know versus an individual's right to privacy. It's about monarchy and motherhood, reputation and legacy. And at the center of it all is a woman who, for the first time, may be completely out of control of her own narrative. So what really happened inside that private meeting? What was Meghan's reaction to seeing the documents she never thought would surface? And why would Lady C, a woman long considered a relic of royal gossip, suddenly emerge with the kind of proof the world has been demanding for years? To understand the depth of this revelation, we must start from the beginning, before the fame, before the palace, before the prince. Meghan Markle's rise was meteoric, but it was never without friction. Her relationship with the royal family was fraught from the start, with quiet doubts behind the scenes and louder accusations in the press. Rumors swirled even before the wedding that something didn't add up. First about her past, then her behavior, and finally, her pregnancies. During her first public pregnancy, eagle-eyed watchers noticed peculiarities, a baby bump that shifted positions, outfits that clung oddly, and a seemingly boundless energy even in the late stages. While many dismissed the observations as nitpicking or racism-fueled obsession, others clung to the anomalies, comparing them to footage of other royal pregnancies and citing subtle inconsistencies in timelines. Even when Meghan gave birth, she delayed showing Archie to the world. Gone were the traditional hospital steps photos with the newborn swaddled in a white blanket. Instead, we saw a controlled, highly stylized introduction in Windsor Castle, where Meghan stood tall in heels just days after supposedly delivering her first child. For many, the image sparked admiration, but for others, it only deepened the suspicion. Over time, the theory that Meghan used a surrogate became a whisper network. A hushed conversation among royal insiders and online communities. No one dared speak openly, especially with the Sussex's litigious reputation. But the theory never died. It lay dormant, simmering beneath the surface of every baby photo, every podcast, every family portrait. Then came the twist. Lady Colin Campbell, known for her explosive books and sharp-tongued analysis of royal affairs, had been investigating all along. And according to close sources, she had quietly secured access to documents that could finally provide answers. But she didn't publish them. She didn't hand them to the Daily Mail or sell them to a tabloid. Instead, she waited. For the right moment. For the perfect impact. That moment came during a private gathering attended by high society figures, a few well-connected journalists, and one unexpected guest, Meghan Markle herself. Why was Meghan there? Some believe it was to smooth things over with the aristocratic circles who had grown increasingly cold toward her. Others think she had no idea what was coming. Either way, when Lady C placed the envelope on the table, the mood in the room shifted. No one spoke. No one moved. Meghan opened it. Her face reportedly turned pale. Her hands trembled. And moments later, she collapsed. Emergency services were not called. Instead, Meghan was quietly taken away by her own security, and the event continued as though nothing had happened. But everyone present knew the truth. The story had changed forever. Since that fateful day, no formal statement has been released. Meghan has gone silent. Harry has canceled appearances. Their team is reportedly scrambling to determine how best to respond, deny, discredit, or divert. But with the documents now circulating in private circles, it may already be too late. In this exposé, we will walk you through the entire sequence of events. From the earliest rumors and red flags to Lady C's stunning intervention and the questions it raises about motherhood, monarchy, and manipulation. We will examine the facts, hear from experts, revisit old interviews with fresh eyes, and unpack what this could mean for the future of the Sussex brand and the House of Windsor itself. Is this the moment Meghan's carefully crafted empire finally collapses? Or is it merely the latest battle in a war she has always been destined to fight? And most importantly, what happens to the child caught in the middle? This is not a story for the faint of heart. It is a story about ambition, secrets, and the high cost of reinvention. It's about truth, however inconvenient, and the moment it finally breaks through the cracks of royal perfection. Stay with us, because the next chapter may be the most shocking yet. There are stories that begin with fireworks and front pages, with flashing cameras and screaming headlines. But this one began in whispers. Private conversations behind closed doors. Late-night voice notes shared between royal aides. Anonymous posts on obscure online forums. It wasn't the kind of scandal the world shouted about, at least not at first. Instead, it was passed from mouth to mouth like forbidden knowledge. A seed of doubt planted quietly, watered by inconsistency, and left to grow in the shadows of the palace. The story of Meghan Markle's mysterious pregnancy was never loud. It was barely audible above the clamor of wedding bells, royal tours, and glowing press releases. Yet from the moment Kensington Palace announced in October 2018 that Meghan was expecting her first child, something felt off. The announcement was made just as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex landed in Australia for their first major royal tour, an announcement timed so perfectly, it looked choreographed for maximum press coverage. But behind the scenes, aides were caught off guard. There had been no traditional medical briefings, no clear confirmation from royal doctors, no signs at all until the media blast. Within days, the public eye turned to Meghan's growing bump. And it grew fast. Photographers documented every public appearance, every outfit, every curve. But what should have been the charming evolution of a glowing mother-to-be began raising questions. The size of her stomach changed dramatically from one appearance to another. In some photos, she looked nearly 9 months along. In others, barely showing. Her bump seemed to shift. Higher, lower, more to the left, then suddenly centered. The public noticed, and murmurs began. Theories began forming on niche online platforms. Some suggested the inconsistencies were due to her fashion choices. Others speculated she was carrying twins. But there were darker theories too. Was Meghan wearing a prosthetic bump? Was this all for show? Was there a surrogate involved? Someone carrying the baby in secret, while Meghan played the role of mother-to-be for the cameras? In any other case, the theory might have fizzled out. But Meghan had long polarized public opinion. To her fans, she was a breath of fresh air in a stuffy institution, a mixed-race, independent, successful woman finally modernizing the monarchy. To her critics, she was something else entirely. Manipulative, calculating, a master of PR spin who had manipulated her way into royalty. So when the inconsistencies with her pregnancy began piling up, critics didn't hesitate to keep digging. Blogs emerged with side-by-side photo comparisons. YouTube channels began analyzing video footage frame by frame, pointing out strange moments, like when Meghan bent over and her bump seemed to fold unnaturally, or when she seemed to carry her belly like a loose accessory. The footage went viral. Suddenly, the whispers were louder. At one event in particular, a visit to the Bristol Old Vic Theatre, Meghan was filmed in a tight black dress with a pronounced bump. As she turned and walked, viewers swore they saw the bump wobble independently of her body, as though it weren't attached to her at all. The clips circulated like wildfire, gathering millions of views. It was dismissed by many as nonsense, a trick of lighting, or just an unflattering angle. But for those who already had their doubts, it was confirmation. Still, the mainstream press steered clear. The British tabloids, though known for their salacious headlines, seemed reluctant to touch the surrogacy rumors. Some speculated this was due to fear of legal repercussions. Others believed there were soft agreements between media outlets and the palace to protect the Sussex image at the time. Whatever the reason, the story stayed mostly underground. The online whisper network became more sophisticated. Users on Twitter and Reddit began creating timelines. They documented every public appearance, every photo, every shift in Meghan's bump. They analyzed her walk, her posture, even the way she held her stomach. Women who had experienced pregnancies of their own began speaking out. "That's not how a baby bump moves," one user commented under a now-deleted YouTube video. "I've been pregnant twice. This isn't real." Others noticed Meghan frequently cradled her stomach with both hands, a gesture many found odd. While some interpreted it as a motherly instinct, others viewed it as overly performative, as if drawing constant attention to the bump. In fact, it became so noticeable that comedians and media outlets began parodying her. It was mockery, yes, but beneath the jokes, there was real suspicion. Then came the birth, or rather, the curious absence of it. On May 6, 2019, Buckingham Palace announced that Meghan had gone into labor. But within minutes, a second announcement followed. The baby had already been born. Confusion erupted. When exactly had she gone into labor? Or had she delivered? Why the conflicting timelines? Normally, royal births follow a familiar protocol. The media is alerted, the hospital is surrounded, and a royal press officer updates the world in real time. But in Meghan's case, the process was cloaked in mystery. There were no photographs outside the hospital, no confirmation from doctors, no hospital staff statements. The couple later revealed that they had driven to Portland Hospital in London and managed to keep the entire event private. But skeptics were unconvinced. How had one of the most famous women in the world delivered a baby in a city swarming with paparazzi, and no one had seen a thing? And then, 2 days later, Meghan and Harry introduced Archie Harrison to the world. The setting was Windsor Castle, not a hospital. Meghan wore a crisp white dress, stood tall in high heels, and looked remarkably fresh-faced for someone supposedly only 48 hours postpartum. Again, the bump was gone. No swelling, no signs of discomfort. Just a poised, smiling duchess. For many, it was the final straw. A new wave of online theorists emerged, now fully convinced that surrogacy had taken place. Some believed Meghan had faked the entire pregnancy to secure Archie's place in the royal line of succession. Others thought it was an image issue, an attempt to appear as the perfect royal mother, worthy of Diana's legacy. A few even went so far as to suggest that Harry was unaware or that he had been coerced into playing along. But without evidence, the theories remained just that, speculation. That is, until the name Lady Colin Campbell began reappearing in comment sections and blog posts. Known for her deep royal connections and penchant for revealing uncomfortable truths, Lady C had long expressed doubts about the Sussex's story. In interviews, she alluded to certain inconsistencies regarding Meghan's pregnancy, but stopped short of making direct accusations. Still, her tone carried weight. What many didn't know was that Lady C had been working quietly in the background, gathering documents, interviewing contacts, and compiling a private dossier. She wasn't interested in cheap gossip. She wanted verification, proof, something ironclad. And according to those close to her, that's exactly what she found. The Whisper Network had done its job. It had kept the story alive for years. It had forced questions into the public consciousness. But what it lacked was credibility. It needed someone from inside the system, someone respected, connected, and unafraid to bring it into the light. Lady Colin Campbell was that someone. And her timing, as always, was impeccable. The whispers were about to become roars. In the vast and complex web of royal observers, few figures are as enigmatic and polarizing as Lady Colin Campbell. To some, she's a scandal-hungry aristocrat with a penchant for controversy. To others, she is one of the few truth-tellers with the aristocratic pedigree and insider access to challenge the establishment from within. But in either case, Lady C has built her reputation not merely on opinions, but on an uncanny ability to surface information that the monarchy itself prefers buried. And in the saga of Meghan Markle, Lady C didn't just participate in the conversation. She spent years investigating, verifying, and silently preparing to drop the kind of revelation that no palace aide, PR consultant, or glossy magazine cover could spin out of existence. To understand the weight of what Lady C eventually unveiled, we must begin with who she is, and why her voice still holds weight in a world saturated with internet gossip and royal speculation. Born in Jamaica and raised in a world that straddled colonial power and aristocratic traditions, Lady Colin Campbell, known as Georgia Ariana Juddy before her marriage, was not just another socialite with connections. She became a British aristocrat by marriage to Lord Colin Evar Campbell, the younger son of the 11th Duke of Argyll. Though the marriage ended in scandal and acrimony, it established her place in the upper tiers of British society. More importantly, Lady C is not a woman who tiptoes around controversy. Her 1992 biography of Princess Diana was one of the first to hint at the cracks beneath the fairy tale. At the time, the book was dismissed as speculative, intrusive, and disrespectful. Yet in the years that followed, much of what she wrote was confirmed: infidelities, emotional struggles, and the immense pressure of royal life. That credibility earned her a grudging respect, even among her critics. When Lady C speaks, people may roll their eyes, but they listen, because history has shown she often knows more than she says. And when it came to Meghan Markle, Lady C had been unusually quiet. That silence, however, was never passive. According to multiple sources close to her, she had grown increasingly disturbed by what she perceived as a dangerous manipulation of public perception. It wasn't Meghan's Hollywood background or even her criticisms of the royal family that alarmed Lady C. It was the way narratives were being crafted, packaged for media consumption with carefully selected facts, all while inconsistencies piled up behind the scenes. Lady C's suspicions began not with gossip blogs or YouTube channels, but with old-fashioned instincts and aristocratic whispers. In her private circles, fellow nobles and palace staff began remarking on the oddities of Meghan's pregnancy. These weren't anonymous internet voices. These were ladies-in-waiting, old family friends, and former aides, people who had seen multiple royal pregnancies up close. They spoke of conflicting timelines, the absence of medical briefings, and a peculiar unease surrounding the announcement of Archie's birth. And Lady C, ever the chronicler, took notes. At first, she didn't speak publicly. That wasn't her way. Instead, she made quiet inquiries. She reached out to private clinics in London. She spoke to retired midwives. She reconnected with people who had worked inside the palace during Meghan's tenure there. And she began collecting documentation. According to insiders, Lady C obtained access to birth registries, hospital intake logs, and even private correspondence between third-party agencies that specialize in confidential surrogacy arrangements. Most of these sources have never spoken to the media. Many had signed NDAs. But for reasons still unknown, a few decided to share what they knew, off the record, under strict conditions, and only with her. What she discovered reportedly shook her. There were inconsistencies not only in the public narrative, but also in the paperwork. Hospital records that didn't align with the birth date announced to the world. An absence of any official record tying Meghan Markle directly to a live birth in the UK during the stated time period. Hints of legal activity involving an unnamed third party and a private birthing facility in California. Names redacted, locations obscured, but the pattern was clear to her. Something had been carefully choreographed, and it did not involve a traditional pregnancy. Still, Lady C was cautious. She knew that without concrete, verifiable evidence, any public accusation would be seen as an act of vengeance or madness. She also knew that the Sussexes had the financial and legal firepower to retaliate swiftly. So she waited. She gathered more, and she refrained from sensationalizing her findings. Instead, she hinted. In interviews, she would speak of glaring contradictions in the Sussex narrative. She made offhand comments about truths that will eventually surface and documents that don't lie. Her tone was measured, even as her words drew attention. She never directly accused Meghan of deception, but she made it clear that she had her doubts. And for those listening closely, it was obvious that Lady C believed something deeply unsettling lay at the heart of Meghan's motherhood story. Then came the moment of reckoning. According to two independent sources who were present at a private event held at a country estate in Gloucestershire, Lady C decided it was time to act. The event, billed as an invitation-only gathering of influential aristocrats, media figures, and thought leaders, was not designed to be a confrontation. Meghan Markle's appearance there was, by all accounts, a surprise. Some say she came seeking reconciliation with influential figures whose approval she had lost. Others believe she was tipped off about Lady C's intentions and came to confront her directly. Whatever the case, the atmosphere changed the moment Meghan entered the room. What followed was not a dramatic shouting match or public humiliation. There was no screaming, no theatrics. Instead, there was silence. Calm, chilling clarity. Lady C reportedly approached Meghan directly. No entourage, no press, just two women standing inches apart. Then, without a word, Lady C produced a sealed manila envelope and handed it to her. What Meghan saw inside has remained a closely guarded secret, but its impact was undeniable. Witnesses describe her face turning white, her legs giving way, a gasp, then a collapse. Some say Meghan regained consciousness within minutes. Others insist she was carried out of the room by her own security team. What no one disputes is that Lady C remained composed, neither triumphant nor cruel. She simply returned to her table and continued her evening as though nothing had happened. Later, as the event wound down, murmurs began to spread. What had been in the envelope? Who else had seen it? And why had Lady C chosen that moment, that audience, that delivery? As details slowly leaked, a picture began to form. The documents included, according to insiders, a compiled report that included adoption-related legal filings, redacted correspondence between attorneys, and birth certificate discrepancies. Though not direct evidence of surrogacy in the traditional sense, the materials strongly suggested that Archie Harrison was not delivered by Meghan herself, and that his entrance into the royal family may have been orchestrated through private channels outside of palace protocol. Lady C has not publicly confirmed the contents of the file. She has refused all interview requests since the incident. But those close to her claim she believes the truth must be revealed, not to destroy Meghan, but to protect the integrity of the monarchy and the trust of the public. To those who know her best, this was not a vendetta. It was a mission, a crusade to bring clarity where spin had reigned supreme. And it wasn't born of hatred or jealousy, but of a deep-seated belief that the royal family, however flawed, must never succumb to deception. Lady C may be many things, opinionated, sharp-tongued, theatrical, but she is also shrewd. She knew that timing mattered. That truth, to be heard, must arrive not in a blaze of accusation, but with the slow, deliberate force of undeniable evidence. In the days following the event, the whispers transformed into roars. The file began circulating among trusted figures in media and government. Behind the scenes, institutions began asking questions. What would happen if these documents were authenticated? Could it mean Archie's titles were granted under false pretenses? Would it affect the line of succession? The stakes were colossal. And yet, Meghan remained silent. As the days turned into weeks, one thing became clear. Lady C had set something in motion that could not be undone. The truth, long buried under smiles, speeches, and spin, was clawing its way to the surface. The weight of truth is rarely felt all at once. It creeps in slowly, peeling back the layers of illusion until only the raw, unfiltered reality remains. For those who followed the royal saga surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, speculation has long outpaced confirmation. Whispers filled the gaps where facts were absent, and theories flourished where transparency was denied. But with the emergence of Lady Colin Campbell's confidential dossier, the conversation abruptly shifted from suspicion to hard evidence. What had once been dismissed as outlandish conjecture was now tethered to something no PR team could spin away: paperwork. The file, referred to quietly among media insiders as the Windsor envelope, was not a single document, but a meticulously compiled bundle of records, reports, and legal correspondences. Though its contents have not been officially released to the public, multiple sources with knowledge of the material have described its contents in chilling detail. What emerged was a map of secrecy, legal maneuvering, and what appears to be an extraordinary effort to maintain a particular public image at all costs. At the heart of the file were several documents allegedly tied to Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor's birth and legal status. The first, and perhaps most striking, was a version of Archie's birth certificate that differed from the one made available to the public. The original, released by the Sussexes shortly after Archie's birth, named Meghan as Rachel Meghan Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, and listed her profession as Princess of the United Kingdom. But the document in Lady C's possession showed curious alterations. According to the source who reviewed it, the mother's name had at one point been completely removed, then later reinstated with adjusted formatting. The date of the revision coincided not with Archie's actual birth, but with a date weeks afterward, raising immediate questions. Why the alteration? Who authorized it? And what prompted the change? More intriguing still were the appended legal notes included in the file. Among them were communications between a London-based family law firm and a private fertility clinic based in California. The correspondence was heavily redacted, but several unredacted lines suggested that a private client, described as a high-profile international couple under contract protection, had engaged in a non-disclosure surrogacy agreement involving multiple jurisdictions. The clinic's name has not been disclosed publicly, but cross-referenced with timelines. It reportedly specializes in high-security arrangements for celebrities seeking confidentiality. Also present in the bundle were notarized travel records suggesting that a woman, whose identity remains sealed, traveled from California to London in early April 2019, just weeks before Archie's supposed birth. She did not stay in a hotel, but was booked into a private medical recovery estate in Windsor. Accompanying her were two healthcare professionals listed as postpartum care specialists. There was no public record of her name associated with royal activities, but her entry into the UK was facilitated under a medical visa, which typically applies to individuals entering for treatment, childbirth, or recuperation. Perhaps most damning were a series of legal agreements believed to be surrogacy contracts. These appeared to be drawn up under American jurisdiction, specifically in the state of California, where commercial surrogacy is legal and widely practiced. The documents laid out conditions, compensation structures, and confidentiality clauses. One clause reportedly specified that the intended parents could legally designate themselves as the child's biological parents on all public-facing documentation, so long as certain criteria were met under the surrogate's local jurisdiction. Another clause clearly prohibited the surrogate from speaking publicly or contacting media for a period of no less than 25 years. The dates, names, and legal representatives associated with these documents matched other public records tied to Meghan's known associates. The final section of the file reportedly included signed affidavits from individuals associated with the surrogacy clinic, some redacted, others marked confidential. One such affidavit allegedly confirmed that a child matching Archie's birth date and identifying details had been delivered by an unnamed woman under a protected identity and immediately released to a private family under a prearranged legal handover. Even more curious were documents referencing a DNA confidentiality waiver. This waiver was signed by one party, presumably a representative of the parents, stipulating that no independent paternity or maternity test would be made public unless legally compelled by a court. While the wording stopped short of confirming that such tests had been conducted, the very existence of the waiver raised more questions than it answered. Legal experts who have quietly reviewed these materials say the dossier, while not constituting definitive legal proof of surrogacy on its own, provides what they call a cohesive mosaic of circumstantial evidence. In other words, no single document declares outright that Meghan Markle did not give birth to Archie. But taken together, the records paint a portrait of an elaborate, multi-layered effort to engineer a birth story behind layers of privacy agreements and legal loopholes. An effort that, if proven, may have extended beyond the bounds of royal tradition and into the realm of public deception. The implications are staggering. For the monarchy, which trades heavily on lineage, bloodlines, and tradition, the biological origin of a royal child is not a trivial matter. If Archie was not born of Meghan Markle, and if that fact was concealed from both the crown and the public, it could unravel more than just the Sussex's public image. It could throw into question Archie's place in the line of succession, the legitimacy of royal titles granted, and the integrity of legal documents submitted to government registries. There are even constitutional concerns. British law, as it pertains to succession, has always been predicated on natural birth within marriage. While the law does not expressly forbid surrogacy, it does not account for it in the context of royal inheritance. In other words, if the monarchy is a lineage-based institution, and if that lineage is now in dispute, then the rules may no longer apply as they once did. Furthermore, it raises the issue of deception, both to the monarchy and to the public. Did Queen Elizabeth II know? Did Prince Charles, now King Charles III, sign off on titles based on what he believed to be a natural birth? Did royal advisors vet the documentation thoroughly, or were they kept in the dark by a Sussex communications machine that operated increasingly outside traditional royal oversight? Some insiders believe that certain senior royals were aware of the surrogacy arrangement but opted to remain silent to avoid scandal. If true, this would suggest a coordinated effort at the highest levels of the firm to protect the Sussex brand and, by extension, the reputation of the crown. But as the adoption records circulate through back channels and find their way into the hands of journalists, constitutional scholars, and potentially legal authorities, the possibility of maintaining that silence grows increasingly unlikely. Then there is the emotional fallout. If these documents are authentic, they suggest that Meghan Markle has been living under immense pressure to maintain a personal myth, an image of a mother who carried and delivered her child while being subjected to the scrutiny of the British press. And if she did not carry Archie, then every interview, every speech, every reference to the pain of childbirth becomes part of a larger fiction. For the public, particularly those who empathized with her experiences as a woman of color navigating royal life, the betrayal would be profound. Equally painful is the question of Prince Harry's awareness. Did he know from the beginning? Was he complicit in maintaining the narrative? Or was he kept in the dark, as some have speculated, by a woman determined to secure her son's future within the royal bloodline, at any cost? Supporters of Meghan argue that surrogacy should not be stigmatized, that it is a valid and often necessary path to parenthood. And they are right. Except this isn't about whether surrogacy is acceptable. It is about whether the truth was hidden, whether legal and royal protocols were manipulated, and whether the public was lied to about a matter as fundamental as a child's origin. The Windsor envelope, if proven authentic, changes everything. In the next chapter, we'll examine how Meghan reacted when these documents were laid bare. What did she say? How did she respond? And why did her body appear to betray her at the very moment her carefully controlled story began to unravel? There are moments in history so private, so personal, and yet so seismic in their implications that they ripple outward like a shockwave, silently dismantling everything that stood before them. Meghan Markle had spent years sculpting her public image with the precision of a seasoned strategist. Every appearance, every word, every carefully curated photo was part of a broader tapestry, one woven with resilience, motherhood, grace under fire, and a relentless pursuit of truth. But what happens when the very foundation of that tapestry is torn apart in a matter of seconds, without warning, without defense, and without a script? By the time Meghan entered the grand drawing room of the Gloucestershire estate that evening, she was already under strain. Those close to her said she had been tense for weeks, consumed by whispers of something brewing behind closed doors. Rumors of an exposé. Murmurs that Lady Colin Campbell was preparing to release something. Not a book, not a podcast, but something far more direct and dangerous. Meghan wasn't naive. She understood better than most that perception was power. But on that day, she had no idea that perception was about tea. The setting was formal but intimate. Heavy drapes muted the setting sun, casting golden shadows over polished wood and velvet upholstery. Only a small circle of Britain's old guard were present: aristocrats, retired diplomats, a handful of discreet journalists, and Lady C herself, seated comfortably in a high-backed chair like a queen of her own domain. Meghan had not been expected. Her arrival created a subtle stir, half curiosity, half calculation. What did she hope to accomplish by being there? Some say she came to confront Lady C directly, to shut down whatever rumor was forming before it grew teeth. Others claim she had no knowledge of what was about to unfold, that she arrived out of hope, or perhaps desperation, seeking allies in a room that had long since turned cold to her presence. Whatever her reason, her timing was fateful. Lady C did not rise. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she reached into a slender leather bag and retrieved an envelope. Plain, unmarked, its weight was invisible, but its contents carried the burden of years of speculation. She handed it to Meghan with the casual gravity of someone delivering a glass of water in a burning building. Meghan took it with a steady hand. She opened it. What she saw next did not produce screams. There was no dramatic monologue, no burst of denial. There was only silence. The room, full of unspoken tension, held its collective breath, a hush so thick it seemed to bend the air. Meghan's eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her breath quickened. Her fingers began to tremble. According to an attendee who witnessed the moment firsthand, Meghan's face drained of color, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a look of raw, naked panic. She clutched the papers tighter, as if trying to crush them out of existence. But the truth had already taken form. It was no longer speculation. It was no longer a distant fear. It was here, in her hands, spelled out in cold, bureaucratic type. Then, her knees buckled. She didn't fall to the ground with a thud, nor did she cry out for help. Instead, she simply folded inward, as if her body could no longer sustain the emotional pressure. A private security officer stepped forward, catching her just before her head hit the marble floor. Several guests stood in alarm, but Lady C remained motionless. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply watched. Meghan was gently laid on a nearby settee. Her breathing was rapid but shallow. Her eyes fluttered as though she was trapped in a dream she couldn't wake from. Within moments, her personal staff surrounded her. No emergency services were called. No dramatic evacuation followed. She was escorted from the room, her head resting against a bodyguard's shoulder, her hands still gripping the envelope like a lifeline. What caused such an extreme physical response? Was it merely shock? Or was it the devastating realization that the carefully managed narrative she had built was now dissolving beyond her control? Sources close to Meghan say she was inconsolable in the hours that followed, that she locked herself in a room at a nearby hotel and refused to speak, that Harry was alerted immediately and took the first available flight back from a scheduled event. When he arrived, she reportedly handed him the envelope without a word. Witnesses say he stared at its contents in stunned silence before setting it down and walking out of the room. It wasn't just the documents. It was what they represented. The collapse of a story years in the making, the unraveling of trust between Meghan and the world, and potentially between Meghan and Harry. While no one knows precisely what was said between them in the privacy of that hotel suite, one source described the tension as worse than anything since Montecito. There were no shouting matches, no flying objects. Just silence, like a cold wind through a broken window. In the days that followed, Meghan withdrew from the public eye entirely. Scheduled appearances were postponed. Interviews were canceled. Her team remained tight-lipped, issuing only a vague statement about her needing time for personal reflection. It wasn't damage control, it was retreat. Meanwhile, Harry, often the more emotionally reactive of the two, was seen attending meetings alone. Eyewitnesses described him as visibly strained, avoiding eye contact and brushing off questions with clipped responses. For a couple so attuned to managing optics, Their sudden disappearance from public life did not go unnoticed. But even behind closed doors, the damage had been done. Meghan's reaction was not just about embarrassment. It was about collapse. Because if the adoption records were authentic, then every word she had spoken about motherhood would be scrutinized. Every tear shed in interviews would be reevaluated. Every time she touched her belly in front of cameras would be played back with a new, painful lens. This wasn't about whether surrogacy was wrong. It was about the alleged deception, the conscious decision to maintain the illusion of pregnancy while orchestrating something very different behind the scenes. And it was about what that meant for her credibility, not just as a royal, but as a public figure, a mother, a woman. Supporters rushed to her defense. They argued that Meghan, like so many women, may have turned to surrogacy out of medical necessity, emotional trauma, or private choice. But the defense began to fray when faced with the question, why not be honest? Why not share the truth in a world increasingly embracing alternative paths to parenthood? The answer, perhaps, lies not in her decisions, but in the pressure she felt to embody a perfect version of motherhood. A woman who defied the odds, bore royal airs, and emerged smiling from every trial. To admit surrogacy, some speculated, would have meant exposing vulnerability, not just physical, but narrative. It would have invited questions about authenticity, tradition, and intention. But the truth has a habit of arriving uninvited. Meghan's breakdown wasn't just emotional. It was symbolic. It marked the collapse of a tightly controlled image and the beginning of a reckoning neither she nor Harry could avoid. No matter how silent she remained, the documents would continue to speak in her absence. And now, with the veil lifted, the world would begin asking the questions she had spent years trying to outrun. For most of his life, Prince Harry has been seen through one of two lenses: the cheeky spare living in the shadow of his older brother, or the wounded soul forever shaped by the death of his mother, Princess Diana. But beneath those familiar narratives lies a man in constant conflict with himself, a tug-of-war between his role and his rebellion, his past and his purpose. And nowhere has that conflict been more pronounced than in his relationship with Meghan Markle, a woman he has long claimed saved him from the cage of the monarchy. But now, as the paper trail surrounding their son Archie threatens to unravel everything, Harry finds himself staring into a mirror he can no longer avoid. The moment Harry received the envelope, torn at the edge, smeared slightly by Meghan's own trembling fingers, he knew something had shifted. He read the documents alone in the dim lighting of a hotel suite far removed from the cameras and titles. His wife had already fled to a separate room, locking herself behind a door she didn't intend to open that night. Left in silence, Harry pored over each page, line after line of technical jargon, legal verbiage, and dates that didn't align with the story he had told himself. His breathing slowed, his jaw clenched, and for the first time in a long while, he found himself paralyzed by a question that wouldn't let go. Had he been deceived? It wasn't that Harry hadn't heard the rumors. Of course he had. The internet had screamed them at him for years. From the moment Meghan's pregnancy with Archie was announced, the theories began. Claims of a moving bump, the curious timing of announcements, the disappearing reappearance of her midsection. But Harry had brushed it all aside. To him, it was noise, racism, classism, jealousy, resentment. It was the same hatred that had chased his mother through the tunnels of Paris and the same toxic glare that had followed every woman he'd ever loved. He had made a choice to ignore it. He had to, because if he didn't, the whole house of cards might collapse. But ignoring something doesn't make it less true. Harry had always wanted a family, one different from the cold formality of the world he was born into. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that with Meghan he could construct something warmer, freer. A new path, built not on duty and tradition, but love and shared pain. And when Meghan told him she was pregnant, he believed it. Why wouldn't he? They were planning their life in exile, escaping what they believed to be a hostile institution. Their relationship was built on mutual trust. Or so he thought. Now, faced with adoption records, correspondence with surrogacy lawyers, and a redacted birth certificate pointing to a surrogate mother across the ocean, Harry was forced to reckon with a different kind of truth. Not the kind the media imposed on him. Not the stories crafted by courtiers. But the kind that came in silence, in private, when there was no one left to lie to, not even himself. He didn't cry, not at first. That would come later. Instead, he sat motionless, trying to track the timeline in his head. The trips to California. The late-night calls Meghan used to take with a consultant. The unexplained absence during a key point in the pregnancy. He had never pressed her for details. He had assumed she was protecting her peace, shielding their unborn child from a world that had already proven itself hostile. But what if she had been protecting a lie? The next day, Harry confronted Meghan, not in anger, but in confusion. He didn't accuse. He didn't yell. He simply asked, "Is it true?" According to someone who was in the vicinity at the time, Meghan didn't respond. Not with words. She reportedly nodded once, then looked away. That was all he needed. For Harry, the revelation struck a deeper nerve. It wasn't just about trust. It was about identity. He had spent the last few years positioning himself as a truth-teller, a man who had broken free from the institution to protect his family. He had written a memoir, given interviews, launched foundations, all on the premise of living authentically. To now discover that the central story of his fatherhood was built on a misrepresentation left him feeling hollow. And there was another wound, one buried far deeper. Prince Harry has always been haunted by his lineage. His very identity as the spare was a curse he tried to outrun. When he fell in love with Meghan, part of what drew him to her was the sense of rebellion. She wasn't from his world. She wasn't a docile aristocrat raised to curtsy and keep quiet. She was vocal, passionate, and unafraid to call out injustice. In her, he saw a way to escape the mold, to rewrite the script handed to him at birth. But what if Meghan had been scripting a narrative of her own all along? The thought plagued him. It wasn't just that she used a surrogate. It was that she may have never planned to tell him. That the story of their family, so carefully built in the public eye, had never been what he thought it was. That every photo, every podcast reference, every moment where she clutched her stomach in public had been a performance, one meant not just for the world, but for him. Still, Harry wasn't just a man betrayed. He was also a father. And for all the confusion he felt, one emotion burned through with painful clarity: love for his son. Archie, to him, was not a symbol or a political prop. He was a boy who had brought meaning to Harry's life in a time of uncertainty. Regardless of how Archie came into the world, Harry had held him, fed him, soothed him during long nights. That bond wasn't forged by DNA or paperwork. It was forged in the quiet moments of parenthood no one ever sees. But that didn't resolve the crisis unfolding around him. Harry now faced impossible choices. Should he defend Meghan publicly, even as the world began to dissect the adoption records? Should he distance himself to salvage what remained of his credibility? Should he speak up and confirm the truth, or continue the silence that had already cost him so much? His team was split. Some advisors urged a carefully crafted statement, one that acknowledged the use of surrogacy while reaffirming the couple's commitment to transparency and love. Others argued for complete silence, fearing that any admission would spark constitutional debates and put Archie's titles and future in jeopardy. Still others whispered that Harry should consider stepping back from public life altogether, at least until the storm passed. But Harry, never one to follow the expected route, did neither. He withdrew. Friends say he stopped answering calls, that he wandered their Montecito estate in silence, that he spent hours in his son's room, just watching him sleep. Meghan remained distant during this time, reportedly staying in a separate part of the house. Conversations were minimal. Trust, once abundant, had become a scarce commodity between them. There were also whispers, difficult ones, that Harry had begun speaking privately to legal counsel, that he was weighing the possibility of temporary separation, not as a punishment, but as a way to protect his son from the growing media circus. That he feared for Archie's mental health years down the line, should this scandal shape how the world viewed him. At the heart of Harry's inner conflict was a paradox. The man who had spent years escaping the monarchy in order to live authentically now found himself entangled in a deception that cut deeper than royal protocol. It wasn't the crown that had betrayed him. It wasn't the press. It wasn't even the public. It was the woman he had trusted above all others. And yet, despite everything, he still loved her. That's what made it all the more painful. This wasn't the collapse of a political partnership or a media brand. It was the quiet, personal devastation of a man who had believed, with every ounce of his being, that he had finally found someone who would never lie to him. That pain, unlike the paparazzi flashes or media betrayals, couldn't be fixed with a statement. It had to be endured. As of now, Harry remains largely out of the spotlight. Insiders say he is navigating the most difficult crossroads of his life. Whatever decision he makes next, whether to protect Meghan, distance himself, or reveal the truth, will not only reshape his own legacy, but that of his children. The world waits. The monarchy watches. And Harry, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, must choose not between royal duty and personal freedom, but between love and truth. For years, they were called crazy, trolls, conspiracy theorists, obsessed fanatics with too much time and too little evidence. The people who populated comment threads, Reddit forums, anonymous blogs, and obscure YouTube channels had been shouting into the void, pointing at clues, inconsistencies, and oddities surrounding Meghan Markle's pregnancy from the very beginning. They were dismissed, mocked, even banned from platforms for promoting what many considered baseless and offensive narratives. But in the wake of Lady Colin Campbell's revelation, a dramatic shift occurred. One so swift and widespread that it reshaped the public discourse almost overnight. The vindication wasn't loud at first. It started subtly, with reposted screenshots of old blog posts and timestamped tweets from 2018 and 2019 resurfacing like buried treasure. Users who had long stopped engaging were suddenly being tagged again, praised, quoted. "You were right all along," people wrote. "You saw it before anyone else did." One of the earliest and most prominent voices in the online community questioning the Sussex pregnancy was a mid-40s woman from the Midlands operating under the pseudonym Crown Canary. She had posted dozens of breakdowns analyzing Meghan's wardrobe choices, the shifting appearance of her baby bump, and the discrepancies in the public timeline of events. Her videos had been demonetized, her accounts shadow banned, her character dragged in public. But after the Lady C dossier began circulating among private media contacts, Crown Canary re-uploaded her most controversial video, this time simply titled, "Told You." It hit 1 million views in less than 24 hours. She wasn't the only one. Across forums, TikTok pages, Instagram archives, and Substacks, a wave of old content returned with renewed purpose. Clips showing Meghan bending awkwardly with a stomach that seemed to fold. Photos from events just days apart where her bump size varied dramatically. Screen grabs of her cupping her belly in ways that didn't quite match natural movement. All the evidence that had been treated as digital folklore was now being re-examined with surgical precision. But it wasn't just the content that changed, it was the tone. The scorn and ridicule that had once been directed at these amateur sleuths suddenly gave way to curiosity, even respect. Journalists who had once dismissed the surrogacy claims as cruel fabrications were now being accused of turning a blind eye to what had been in plain sight. Headlines that once declared palace joy as Meghan announces pregnancy were replaced by ones that read, "Questions surround Sussex birth story after shocking documents emerge." Some of the most surprising acknowledgments came from within the royal commentator community itself. Royal reporters who had once prided themselves on being insiders began issuing quiet retractions. One longtime correspondent, who had previously defended Meghan's every public appearance, admitted in a radio interview that there had always been oddities we were told not to question. He added, "The narrative was curated, tightly managed, and we didn't push hard enough." For the digital sleuths who had suffered public shaming, it was a bittersweet moment. Many had lost followers, credibility, and even jobs for daring to question the official story. But now, their inboxes were flooded with apologies, interview requests, and even job offers. Some turned down media appearances entirely, preferring instead to remain anonymous, safe from the sudden attention and knowing that their cause had never been about fame. It had been about the truth. Reddit threads dedicated to royal family analysis surged in activity. One particular thread titled, "Meghan's Bump Timeline: What They Never Wanted You to See," gained over 40,000 upvotes in a single day. Users from around the world added their own observations, photos, and reflections. Nurses, midwives, and mothers chimed in, sharing their own experiences with pregnancy and how they had quietly doubted Meghan's story for years but never voiced it, fearing backlash. Then came the backlash against the backlash. Supporters of Meghan, still numerous and vocal, decried the shift in tone as a witch hunt. They argued that online sleuthing had always been rooted in misogyny, racism, and an unwillingness to accept the non-traditional royal narrative. To them, the exposure of the surrogacy documents didn't justify the years of invasive speculation and ridicule directed at Meghan. They insisted that surrogacy, if used, should have been Meghan's private choice, not the public's business. But that argument struggled to gain traction as more details emerged from the dossier. It wasn't just about the use of a surrogate. It was about the orchestration of a false narrative. The deception, the paperwork manipulation, the PR campaigns that leaned heavily into Meghan's pregnancy as a cornerstone of her empowered mother image. It all felt less like a private medical decision and more like a calculated performance. Even among those who had defended Meghan vehemently in the past, there was growing disillusionment. "I supported her because I believed she was being mistreated by the system," wrote one former fan in a viral Facebook post. "But now I feel manipulated. If she had been honest about surrogacy, I'd still support her. It's the lie that hurts." There were legal questions too. Lawyers on news panels began speculating about the ramifications of knowingly presenting a false narrative to the public, especially one involving birthright, titles, and succession. If Archie was not born of Meghan, and the palace was unaware, could this be considered misrepresentation? Were there grounds for stripping titles, revisiting financial arrangements, or even pursuing legal consequences? Public opinion began to splinter. Polls in both the UK and the US showed dramatic shifts in attitudes toward Meghan and Harry. Approval ratings that had already declined in recent years plummeted further. In one poll conducted by a British news outlet, 67% of respondents said they believed Meghan had intentionally misled the public about Archie's birth. Another poll revealed that 54% of Americans who had previously viewed the couple favorably now believed they had something to hide. And then there was the meme culture. The internet, never one to miss a moment of irony, exploded with satirical content. Memes comparing Meghan's bump to props from science fiction movies circulated rapidly. Hashtags like #BumpGate, #SurrogateSaga, and #Windsor Whispers trended for days. Some were cruel, others simply humorous. But all of them underscored the magnitude of the public shift, from defenders to skeptics, from consumers of the narrative to active dismantlers of it. Influencers who had once promoted the Sussexes' charitable work began distancing themselves. Brands quietly removed collaborations. Oprah, whose landmark interview with the couple had helped shape public perception, declined to comment when asked whether she had been misled. Her silence was loud. The media world braced itself. If Lady C's dossier could do this much damage in private, what would happen if its contents were officially verified? Would journalists who failed to investigate be held accountable? Would platforms that banned dissenting voices issue public apologies? Would this redefine the relationship between public figures and the people they seek to influence? Perhaps the most poignant reaction came from a small but growing group of former royal superfans who had once idolized Meghan for what she represented: a break from tradition, a voice for the voiceless, a champion of modern womanhood. These fans had stood by her through the race-baiting headlines, the tabloid attacks, the exile to California. But the revelation of adoption documents, and the suggestion that the entire pregnancy was staged for optics, left them stunned. "It's like finding out your hero was a hologram," one wrote. "I didn't need her to be perfect. I needed her to be honest." Not everyone turned. Some stayed loyal. But the ground had shifted. The internet detectives, once dismissed and degraded, now found themselves at the forefront of a reckoning. They had not simply guessed. They had documented, tracked, and pieced together fragments of a truth that had been aggressively denied. And in doing so, they had proven a powerful point. In the age of digital scrutiny, even the most carefully crafted stories cannot survive forever if built on falsehood. For an institution as ancient and unyielding as the British monarchy, silence is not absence. It is a form of strategy, a shield, a message without words. When Buckingham Palace remains silent, it is never because they have nothing to say. It is because they know the weight of a single utterance could shift the earth beneath them. So as the surrogacy scandal surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry began to crescendo, fueled by leaked documents, rising public scrutiny, and an online army newly validated, The question was no longer whether the palace would respond, but how long they could afford not to. Historically, Buckingham Palace has followed a well-established crisis management principle. Never complain, never explain. It is a mantra born not of arrogance, but of survival. The monarchy has endured revolutions, wars, divorces, and death by maintaining the illusion of calm amid chaos. The royal family does not panic. It endures. But this was no ordinary scandal. This wasn't a matter of personal behavior, of feuds, or fashion choices. It touched something far deeper: the legitimacy of a royal child, the integrity of royal titles, and the crown's role in upholding truth before tradition. For King Charles III and his senior advisors, the stakes were monumental. At first, the palace did exactly what was expected. It said nothing. Not a press release. Not a royal source quote. Not even a background briefing to the sympathetic corners of the media. For days, the silence stretched into tension. Reporters gathered outside palace gates, anticipating the familiar black folders that announce official statements. Editors sent requests for comment to the press office. Nothing came back. Behind the scenes, however, activity surged. Palace aides were reportedly summoned for emergency strategy sessions. Legal teams were briefed. Internal memos were circulated referencing press escalations regarding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and advising all staff to refrain from private commentary on unverified press content. A former courtier familiar with the royal household described the mood in those early days as quietly furious. Not at the public, not even at Lady Colin Campbell, but at the disruption of a carefully maintained order. What complicated the palace's position was the distance that Harry and Meghan had created between themselves and the crown. Since stepping down as senior royals in 2020, the Sussexes had styled themselves as independent figures, free from the trappings and expectations of royal protocol. They had built a media empire from Montecito, launched podcasts, Netflix specials, and memoirs, and cast themselves as victims of institutional cruelty. Their children, while technically holding titles by birthright, were never expected to return to royal life. And yet, the monarchy had never formally severed ties. Titles were retained. Archie and Lilibet were listed in the line of succession. King Charles had even publicly expressed his love for his darling boy and his hope for reconciliation. The royal family, whether they liked it or not, were still tethered to the Sussex narrative. Now, with the surrogacy documents threatening to upend not just personal reputations, but constitutional norms, the palace was cornered. If they issued a statement acknowledging the scandal, they risked legitimizing it and potentially exposing themselves to scrutiny for having failed to verify the circumstances surrounding Archie's birth. If they denied it outright, they'd be asked to produce contradictory evidence. If they said nothing, they would be accused of complicity. Some insiders urged the king to act swiftly. That a brief, dignified statement reaffirming the family's commitment to truth and tradition could reset the tone. Others, particularly among Charles's older advisors, counseled caution. They argued that nothing should be said until the authenticity of the documents was verified by a legal authority. One wrong word, they warned, could open the monarchy to legal challenge or even parliamentary inquiry. In the middle of the storm stood Charles III himself, a monarch who had waited decades to take the throne and who now found himself presiding over the most volatile period of royal scandal since the Diana years. Those who know Charles describe him as deeply protective of the institution, fiercely proud of his lineage, but also weary of the media circus that had surrounded his family for most of his life. He had made peace with Harry's departure. He had tolerated the Netflix documentaries, the Oprah revelations, even the accusations in Spare. But this was different. Privately, sources say Charles felt betrayed, not just by Harry, but by the breach of dignity the situation presented. The monarchy, he believed, could survive controversy, but it could not survive becoming farce. If the world began to question the authenticity of royal births, if the image of the royal family as guardians of tradition gave way to reality TV sensationalism, the damage could be irreparable. And so, the palace moved, but not in the way many expected. Rather than a public statement, they began a silent investigation. Discreet inquiries were made into the registration of Archie's birth,